Platinum Dunes has been behind the reboots of several different horror franchises, so it may not surprise you to hear that they were actually close to producing a new movie with little old Mikey Myers. And let me tell you, this movie would have been batshit insane. So join us for what the f happened to this unmade horror movie as we take a look at Platinum Dunes Halloween. See, in the years after Rob Zombie's two tepid films,
Lori!
I'm sorry. Okay.
there were many different attempts to bring the series back. There was the Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer script, Halloween 3D, which we've covered on this show. Then there was also Halloween Returns, which we've also covered on this show. God damn, this era is just a surplus of unmade Halloween movies. But on April 1st, 2012, it was rumored that the Weinsteins had brought along Platinum Dunes to produce a Halloween film. They'd already had success with films like Amityville Horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Friday the 13th.
Are you looking for this? Because it completes your outfit.
As well as less successful ones like The Hitcher and A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, God.
No. Just me.
So they seemed like a pretty good choice for making some money. But probably not so great of a choice if you're an actual fan of the series that was wanting it to go back to its roots and avoid the grimy Rob Zombie style.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you!
Platinum Dunes' involvement is truly the definition of irony, because the whole reason that the Weinsteins had abandoned past sequel plans and went forward with the zombie reboot in the first place was due to the success of remakes like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But unfortunately, the news of their involvement was just a rumor. It turned out that Dimension Films were simply fielding pitches from many different places, and Platinum Dunes just happened to be one of them. I want to thank you guys for watching What the F Happened to this unmade horror movie, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. Platinum producers Brian Fuller and Andrew Form had always wanted to make a Halloween film. They were ready to go with several pitches from several different writers. We're going to focus on the pitch by Scott Milam because that's the version that has the most information out about it. Whether or not Platinum Dunes or even Dimension would have gone with this is anyone's guess. I mean, I'm not a producer, but it certainly raises some interesting questions. So what exactly was Milam's script about? First, this is the definition of a remake. Milam is taking everything we know about Halloween and flipping it on its head. And it starts right from the introduction. See, we get a prologue where little Mikey Myers is out trick-or-treating with a friend, and they're abducted by a mysterious stranger. Judith isn't killed, she's simply a negligent babysitter. In fact, that's the last we see of Michael for quite a while. 10 years later, we pick up with Lori and her friend Rachel, whose brother Sean was also abducted with Mike. Judith had left town years ago, and Lori's parents have long since passed. She's living with her older brother Daniel. Yeah, they created an older brother character, for some reason. Due to their traumatic childhood, neither Rachel or Lori celebrate Halloween, and they look to avoid it at all costs. Their plan this year is to go on a ferry to a place where they can just avoid the All Hallows Eve festivities. And yes, Lori still is friends with Annie, though Linda isn't anywhere in sight. Annie's father, Sheriff Brackett, is also nowhere to be seen in this version, which is a bit of a disappointment. And while I may be using footage of Laurie Strode here, her name is actually Lori Myers. See, she never needed to be adopted, as her brother never killed her sister and sent her family on a downward spiral. And oddly enough, Rachel is actually more of the lead here. I'll also point out that she's clearly an homage to Rachel Carruthers from Halloween 4. Given that this character is essentially the surrogate mother of Laurie Strode's daughter Jamie in those movies, the fact that we're getting Rachel and Laurie together is honestly pretty cool. It's moments like this that show that Milam has an understanding of the mythos, even if it's not evident most of the time. Annie is nice enough to take on the task of babysitting little Lindsay Wallace and Tommy Doyle so that Lori and Rachel can go on the ferry.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
I'm sure you're wondering, and yes, Dr. Sam Loomis is in this story. But rather than a psychologist, he's now an FBI advisor, and he's been tasked with covering a slew of strange murders happening around town. Ooh, murders you say? Oh, so we're finally getting some Michael Myers action. Well, yes and no. See, it's weird. We get a pretty standard Michael kill where he takes out Annie while she's babysitting, but then we get this extended sequence on a ferry that feels more like Jason Takes Manhattan than anything. Of all the Friday the 13th films to rip off, this seems like an odd choice. On the boat, the Shape actually crosses paths with a costume partier who's dressed up as John Wayne Gacy. This is a nice little callback to Halloween Resurrection, but this time Michael actually kills the guy. It's an interesting moment because you've got a fictional killer murdering someone who's dressed as a real one. After a long sequence on the ferry where he kills even more people, the Shape is sent into the frigid depths of the water, pinned under a car. That's when it's revealed that the masked killer was not Michael, but Michael's friend Sean Carver instead. See, as the story progresses, it starts to become very evident that either Michael can teleport, or there's two different killers. So this movie takes the Scream route, and we have two killers here. It's Sean Carver and Michael Myers, and they're both wearing the Shape mask. The real question is, are they true evil, or are they just traumatized children? I'm not real sure. The film ends on Judith returning to town. She comes home to discover that her boyfriend has been murdered, and someone walks towards her from the closet as she exclaims, "Michael!" I think you know what happens next. It's a pretty cool ending, but honestly leaves more questions than answers. Why did any of this happen? Why were they abducted, only for the children to come back wanting to kill everybody? None of this is explained and brings up more questions than answers. I assume that this is where the Thorn cult gets brought in and are revealed to be the people that kidnap the young boys, but we don't get that reveal here, so it's anyone's guess. Plus, the Thorn cult storyline is pretty divisive amongst the fan community, so it would be a strange choice to bring that back. The killer's motivation just doesn't make a whole lot of sense here, and mostly just feels like someone trying to rework the Meyer story just because, versus having a legitimately intriguing idea. It seems pretty evident that Milam came up with this ending and worked his way back. But unfortunately, while the ending is pretty cool, the journey to it isn't really worth it. Because what takes this movie 90 minutes to set up was done in all of 3 minutes in the original. And done a hell of a lot better. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm quite glad they were never able to make this movie. The David Gordon Green films that we received instead aren't perfect,
Evil dies tonight!
but they are much more in line with the Halloween that we know and love, versus this Platinum Dune style of ramping everything up to 11. The story that Milam provides feels more like a fan film by someone that had only seen the series once every 20 years and thinks they can do better. In fact, the biggest comparison I can think of would be Adam Marcus's Jason Goes to Hell, where the writer clearly has a distinct lack of understanding of what makes the character so great in the first place. This is a fine example of just because you can change something doesn't mean you should. Had this movie been made, it likely would have found itself in the same camp as Rob Zombie's rancid films. I don't know about you, but that's not really what I want from a Halloween sequel. Just give me Michael Myers killing some people, and I will be happy. Not Sean Carver, Michael Myers. Because there's only one boogeyman.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Everyone remembers the ending to Halloween 4, right? With Michael being gunned down by every redneck and law enforcement in the tri-state area. Then we see Jamie recovering back at her home afterwards. It seems like everything is finally okay.
And then we go into that first-person perspective, the familiar approach. Then the stabbing. Then the screams. By the time Loomis gets to the stairs, he sees what all that screaming is about. Jamie is standing there just as Michael had years prior, with the idea that Jamie would take over the mantle of the Shape. While Mustafa Akkad may have had other plans, today on What the F Happened to This Unmade Horror Movie, we're taking a look at Halloween 5, The Killer Inside Me.
Gentlemen, he's still on the loose.
I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
In continuing with our extensive Halloween coverage, the what if of Halloween 5 has always intrigued me. For those unaware, the Halloween 5 that we received was released merely a year after the fourth entry. That means they had to write, film, and edit this bad boy in just 12 months. And why would they ever do this? Because theater chains pledged a financial guarantee if producer Mustafa Akkad provided the film by October 1989. So I guess money always wins in the end. And since Akkad knew he'd be making this money guaranteed, it's a really poor continuation that mutes the Jamie Lloyd character and gives her these strange psychic powers. It's easily one of the most divisive of the series, and with good reason. It's boring and doesn't make a lot of sense. Why did this hermit take care of Michael for a year? Why does Jamie have psychic powers? Why did they make the boneheaded decision to kill off Rachel? Well, it turns out this wasn't the original plan. In fact, we were originally going to get the film promised to us from the ending of part 4. This would have started right after the stabbing. Jamie's foster mother, Mrs. Carruthers, is being treated for her stab wounds. She's surprisingly forgiving, even caressing Jamie's cheek. But Mr. Carruthers, on the other hand, is pissed, saying things like, "She's not my daughter anymore. She's a monster. I'm sorry we ever took her in. I'll kill her myself." Wow. Tell us how you really feel, Mr. Carruthers. Though to be fair, she had just stabbed his wife, so he's probably a little bit perturbed. Jamie is left alone with a caretaker while Loomis and the cops deal with the chaos. Cue another scream. Loomis discovers Jamie gone and the woman that was supposed to be watching her stabbed through the heart. This is all the proof that Loomis needs to know that Jamie is taking on the mantle of her uncle. This is where the story takes a bit of a turn. Jamie runs off to an old church and ends up having an argument with an evil version of herself. This evil version tells her how she needs to kill. So we still get that weird aspect where Jamie has superpowers. There would be a lot of back and forth between Jamie and her evil self as she tries to avoid becoming her uncle. Meanwhile, the police are trying to hunt her down and take her in alive. Though Loomis wants her dead, fearing she'll be just as evil as Michael, his greatest regret. Remember this girl from part 4? While it was cut in the film, this was originally supposed to be the grown-up version of Lindsay Wallace from the first film. She's friends with Rachel and consoles her after all the craziness. Rachel and Lindsay hide Jamie from the police because they obviously think that she's innocent. And as bad as the intro of Halloween 5 is, with Michael escaping the mine and tumbling down a river, this script doesn't have much better reasoning. Rachel goes to the mine shaft to make sure that Michael is in fact dead, and she somehow falls in herself, because this is apparently a comedy sketch. Needless to say, we find out that Michael is still alive, and Rachel barely escapes with her life. She also meets up with a jock from her school named Tom, who's having a Halloween party out on his farm. I guess she just completely forgot about poor Barry. Michael makes his way to Jamie because apparently that psychic connection is still alive and well. He kills Lindsay and disappears, so the murder is blamed on Jamie. And so much for bringing back the Lindsay character. Loomis enters full villain mode here. with him filling a syringe with cyanide and trying to inject poor Jamie with it. He even gives this super cheesy monologue that goes on way too long, with great lines such as, "What's the matter? I'm a doctor. Come and get your medicine. Cyanide. No more senseless deaths. One child and the cycle will be complete." And then we get Jamie going full-blown psychic again, multiple evil versions appearing all around them. Jamie screams for them to not hurt Loomis, which is enough to convince Loomis that Jamie isn't evil and is clearly trying to fight whatever is trying to take her over. I like that that's what it takes for Loomis to be convinced. It's not like he can see these evil Jamies. We get a cool set piece at a Halloween party where Michael dispatches the remaining partygoers. There's even a moment where Rachel thinks that Jamie stabbed her, only for it to be revealed that it's actually Michael stabbing her from behind. Jamie's innocence is something that the story plays with constantly. Nearly every character is convinced both of her innocence and then her guilt at different parts of the script. So we never really know if she is evil or not.
Let's play a game. Catch the little girl.
Probably my least favorite aspect of the story is when Loomis confronts Michael on the farm. That's where the party's being held. Michael pulls a Jamie and has multiple doppelgangers appear, confusing Loomis. Not sure when this power was suddenly introduced. Loomis unmasks them one by one until finally getting to the real Michael, who snaps Loomis's neck. Yeah, he's dead. Well, I guess that's one way to get any fans to dislike your story. I'd say I understand why this script was scrapped just based on this moment alone. But we're not done yet. We've still got one terrible final confrontation to cover. See, Jamie pulls a Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street and tells Michael that she's not afraid of him. Magic knives appear out of thin air and explode from Michael's body. He collapses and Jamie takes off his mask. This is where we go full Jason Takes Manhattan and Michael is suddenly a young boy. Yeah, God, what a dumb finale. This scene alone makes me kinda glad they didn't go this route, even if we didn't get evil Jamie in the long run. But then the actual ending is kinda where the script shines. Rachel is sent off in an ambulance and Jamie joins Tom as they drive to the hospital. But as they're driving down the road, they suddenly crash into a tree. Inside the wrecked truck, we see a screwdriver firmly planted in Tom's head. The movie closes on Jamie as she walks down the street alone. Loomis was right. Jamie has succumbed to the evil. The final shot answers it all for us. Unfortunately, or well, fortunately, depending on some of that stuff in the third act, this version never had a chance of making it to production, with the theater chains dictating that young Jamie could not be the Myers successor. The fourth film had been entirely marketed as the return of Michael Myers, so passing on the mantle would have just pissed off fans, at least according to theaters. Akkad agreed and this draft was thrown out. Damn. While this script clearly has some issues, there are some interesting elements that I would have loved to have seen executed. Heck, I just really wanted an evil Jamie. What we got instead was an absolute monstrosity of a film featuring a psychic Jamie, a delirious Loomis, and a version of Michael that has to be nursed back to life by a hermit. Yeah, and that's not even getting into the Man in Black stuff. Oh, they really messed this one up. But at least we know why they messed it up so bad. So if there's any lesson to learn from this, it's that maybe don't take the guaranteed money if it means your product is going to suffer. Obviously, the Halloween franchise continued to go strongly for many years, with the most recent film, Halloween Ends, wrapping up the Laurie Strode saga and bringing the franchise to a close. For now, at least. What did you think about this idea? Would you have liked to have seen Killer Inside Me as an actual film? What other unmade horror movies do you want us to talk about? Comment below and we'll see you in the next one.
So hot, I can see shit out the sides of my eye. I'm ripping the fucking head off.
Whether it's Batman vs. Superman, Alien vs. Predator, or even Godzilla vs. Kong, versus films have always intrigued audiences. Our imaginations just go wild when it comes to massive characters clashing with each other. And after the massive success of Freddy vs. Jason, studios were really hoping they could replicate that result. While other combinations like Chucky and Leprechaun were discussed, there was never any forward momentum. But there was one rumor that kept popping up that intrigued horror fans everywhere. What if the lead Cenobite from Hellraiser were to throw down with Haddonfield's infamous sister killer? That's precisely what we almost got. So join us on What the F*** Happened to this unmade horror movie as we dive into what could have been with Michael vs. Pinhead. With Freddy vs. Jason kicking all sorts of ass at the box office, other films immediately started popping up just like it. We finally received the long-awaited Alien vs. Predator, and the Sci-Fi Channel even got in on the action, providing us with Boa vs. Python and Puppet Master vs. Demonic Toys. But when you think of the big faces of horror, outside of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, there's often one other figurehead, Michael Myers. But who would he face? Given that Dimension Films, who owned the rights to Myers at the time, also owned the rights to another popular horror villain, Pinhead, that seemed like the obvious choice. While the idea had been brought up in the 90s, with Pinhead himself, Doug Bradley, being very against the idea, it still had a bit more steam to it. Screenwriter Dave Parker, who would go on to make films such as The Hills Run Red and a segment in Tales of Halloween, started developing a script in the late 90s that would pit the two horror icons against each other. Yeah, you heard me right, the 90s. But that doesn't mean this wasn't Freddy vs. Jason inspired, as Parker was anticipating massive success from that long gestating project, and knew other studios would want to capitalize. I'm sure he didn't think it'd take New Line quite so long to finally get their movie done, but hey, it finally happened, and he was right. Studios wanted more. Parker's version was titled Halloween. Well then, guess we're not starting out on a strong note. Parker wanted to approach the two characters in an almost Frankenstein meets the Wolfman style, which was a bit lighter than their own individual entries. As such, Parker started to also play with the characters' mythologies. Oy vey. First up was Michael, whose origins are completely retconned. Instead of murdering his sister on Halloween night in the way that we know it, he is instead given the lamentation configuration by a mysterious homeless man. When young Michael opens it up, a demon named Sam Hain comes out and possesses the child. So now, possessed Mikey murders his sister, and you know how the rest goes. Everything else happens how we remember it. Then we skip to present day, and for some reason, Kirsty Cotton from the first two Hellraiser entries, and several others are at Michael's house looking for something. Because reasons. They're able to find the puzzle box, but one of these dummies accidentally opens it and releases the Cenobites. This also signals Michael that he needs to come home. There's a bit of a struggle as the sides clash in Myers' old house, but when Michael finally shows up, Pinhead immediately recognizes him as Sam Hain and is on a mission to return him back to hell. You know, think Frank from Hellraiser Part 1. But Parker's pitch did not go well, and Dimension had no intentions of ever merging the two franchises. They even rejected yet another pitch in 2002. Now, skip ahead a year, and Dimension was absolutely down to merge the two franchises after seeing the great success that New Line had doing it. And they already had some old pitches to dust off. We already went over Parker's, but what about the one from screenwriters Josh Stolberg and Bobby Florsheim? You may recognize Stolberg and Florsheim as the writers behind Piranha 3D, Jigsaw, and even Spiral. But long ago, they were just TV writers with a grand idea. Halloween in Hell, Michael vs. Pinhead. Their screenplay was an absolute love letter to horror films, opening on a survivors group that includes Kirsty Cotton and Jamie Lloyd from Halloween Parts 4 through 6, but also characters from Critters, Leprechaun, and even Phantasm. We even get an acknowledgement from Jamie of the Thorn Curse. And you'll be happy to know that they did intend to bring back Danielle Harris. As the meeting ends, Michael strikes, trying to kill her. Kirsty uses the lamentation configuration to block Michael's knife, but he pierces it and embeds the knife in Kirsty's chest, summoning the Cenobites. This is actually a pretty cool moment because despite Kirsty dying, which really sucks, it does make things more personal. Plus, we get the wonderful moment of Kirsty saying to Pinhead, "You never got me," just before she dies. It's truly fantastic, and even reading it, you can just feel Pinhead's contempt. He vows to get revenge on Michael for killing Kirsty. Then there's Jamie, who was wounded in the battle. She goes to the hospital for a blood transfusion because I guess she keeps a steady supply of her own blood at the hospital? Okay then. A nurse gives her the blood, but makes the grave error of putting it back into the general blood storage. This mistake causes 7 other people to be infused with Jamie's blood. Given the curse that's on Jamie's blood, Michael can sense all of these people, so he's ready to go on a rampage. After killing all but one, our final girl Betsy, she teams up with Jamie to take on Michael. In the midst of all this, they come across other lamentation configurations, 160 to be exact, and are told that they can be put together in some kind of Rubik's Cube fashion that would help seal the gate of hell forever, therefore trapping both Michael and Pinhead. We get one massive final battle where Michael kills a bunch of Cenobites and even violently removes some of Pinhead's nails. It's one of the more exciting moments of the story, and one I would have loved to have seen filmed. The big question for any of these versus movies is always, well, who wins? Most are able to slyly get around the topic, having both characters win in their own distinct way.
Save Martha!
And here is no different. The writers wanted the studio to release different endings with different victors, ultimately still ending the actual film in the same way of Jamie and Betsy closing the portal to hell. So it would really have little consequence for the next film if they had chosen to go that route. But yet again, Dimension just ended up being cold on the idea and turned it down. But in the most exciting turn of events, Dimension actually approached original creators John Carpenter and Clive Barker about creating their own film. Their idea was for Carpenter to direct and Barker to write. Shockingly, both filmmakers were very intrigued by the concept, respecting each other's work, while also seeing it as an opportunity to right the wrongs that the franchises have gone down. Doug Bradley, who had previously said he wasn't interested in such a team-up, said he was totally down if Carpenter and Barker were involved. But unfortunately, Dimension Films just didn't have the patience for anything but a rush job, something that Barker and Carpenter both loathed. Not to mention the massive roadblock that came in the way of Halloween producer Mustafa Akkad. Akkad, who owned the rights to Michael, had a set of rules for the franchise, and pairing him against Pinhead went against almost every single one of them. He always wanted the Michael Myers character to remain grounded, and having him face a demon just didn't sit well with him. So he completely blocked the project from being made. Who knows what would have come of that, but with the creative team of Carpenter and Barker, I can only imagine how groundbreaking it would have been. But even still, the biggest issue when bringing these two Goliaths together is that they have nothing in common. Pinhead is a being from hell who is brought forth in order to torture his victims so that they can feel the ultimate pleasure, pain. Michael, on the other hand, is on a never-ending journey to try and kill his family members, in particular his sister Laurie Strode. So how exactly would these two behemoths even meet? Every way that's been drafted so far has been awful. While we may have never gotten Pinhead versus Michael on the big screen, that doesn't mean there won't be more opportunities. With David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy coming to a close with Halloween Ends, the producers will be looking at what to do with the character next. And with the new Hellraiser film releasing on Hulu, we finally have a big return to that series. So the idea of these two coming together for a film isn't as far-fetched as it may have been just a few years ago. Regardless of whether we ever get it or not, I'm just grateful there was some redemption for both of these characters after some very bad entries in their respective series.
Trick or treat,
But I'm not gonna lie, I'd love to see Michael go toe-to-toe with Pinhead. One of these days.